Good morning, ladies. I don't think they were expecting for this class to be so full, but we're really excited to have you here. Hopefully you're here for the class on emotional maturity, relationships, and conflict. My name is Megan Day. My husband and I lead the campus ministry in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Woo! This is Julia.
Hey guys, I'm Julia Dunn. I'm from Denver. I'm one of the full-time interns there.
We're very excited about this class, especially just coming from the women's class. We're starting to see a theme throughout this conference about vulnerability. Especially excited to team up with Julia. She's a woman of deep conviction. I've learned a lot from her preparing together. Our goals and prayers for this class is that you can walk away with a deeper understanding about what it means to be vulnerable and with some tools to have deeper relationships in your life and resolution in your conflict. So our lesson today is called Get Real, Get Messy. I'm going to talk about what it means to get real, and Julia's going to talk about what it means to get messy. So let's start. Turn with me to Matthew 26. This is a scripture that most of us are pretty familiar with. It's Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Go ahead, come in, find a seat on the floor. So this is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane right before he goes to the cross. And even though this is a familiar scripture, we wanted to look at this passage from a little bit of a different perspective. We want to focus on his relationship with his friends. So Matthew 26, starting in verse 36, it says, Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, Sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour, he asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away a second time and prayed, My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away, unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to his disciples and said to them, Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So here is Jesus about to embark on the most difficult journey anyone has ever walked. He's troubled. He understands he needs time with his Father to work through his emotions. He needs a quiet place to pray and cry out. But even though Jesus had this one-on-one, direct, intimate connection with God, he was wholeheartedly dependent on God, Jesus chose not to go at it alone. As long as it was dependent on him, he wanted and perhaps even needed his friends by his side. So first thing I want to talk about this morning, we need to get real about our need for others. So when I was in college, I remember having lunch with a friend. We might have been in a discipling relationship at that time, I'm not sure. But I was telling her about this book I was reading, a shepherd's look at Psalm 23. And in the book, the author is talking about how the sheep desperately need the shepherd. Like all they need is the shepherd to survive and to be happy. So I'm telling my friend how, I want to be at a place where I'm fine if I have God and God alone. Like I just want to need God and nothing else in this world. And I think I'm sounding spiritual. And she goes, Megan, I don't think you need to grow in needing God. I think you're really good at needing God. I think you need to grow in needing people. And I was totally taken aback by what she shared. And she went on to explain how she didn't feel needed by me, and how this idea of needing one another is what brings closeness in relationships. She gave an example of another sister who she didn't even know as long, but she felt really close to because she felt that sister needed her, and vice versa. And it was hard for me to wrap my mind around it. You know, I'm feeling like, no, all I need is God. People are imperfect. People make mistakes. People can pull you away from God. I like people, but I don't need them. But the more I've studied the scriptures, the more I understand God created us to be healthily dependent on one another. Let's look at a couple examples. Take Adam. Adam had it all. All the food he could want, flowing streams of water, beauty all around him, all creatures under his authority. And most importantly, he had personal, intimate time with God. What more could a man need? But God says in Genesis 2:18, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a suitable helper for him." So even though Adam had this one-on-one close walk with God, and we would look and say, Adam wasn't alone. Adam had God, right? But God says, no, I made you to need even more than just me. I made you to need people. Or take Joshua. Joshua was one of two people who stood up to the Israelites about entering the promised land. He had great faith in what God could do. He stayed true to his convictions even when the whole Israelite community threatened to stone him. Surely he can do it on his own, right? But you know what God tells Moses in Deuteronomy 3:28? He says, "But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, because he will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land you will see." God is saying, Moses, Joshua, as mighty as he is, he needs you. He can't do what I've prepared for him to do without you. Joshua needed people. Or how about David? Man after God's own heart, mighty warrior, strong and courageous. You know what it says in 1 Samuel 23? David's on the run from King Saul. 85 priests have just died because of a lie that David told. And in verse 16 it says, "And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God." David needed Jonathan to help him turn to God and be refreshed. He needed Jonathan to stay faithful to the very end, especially in the hard times. So Adam needed Eve, Joshua needed Moses, David needed Jonathan. Who do you need? Think about the women in your life. Do you have a conviction that you need them? Do they feel needed by you? How about the woman who disciples or mentors you? Do you need her? Or the women that you disciple, do they feel needed by you? Or the other women in your Bible talk? I know some of us are more relational than others, right? Some of us love social events, spilling out our guts, being around people all the time. Others of us prefer to be alone, keep our feelings and thoughts to ourselves. We need moments of silence. Or maybe we fall somewhere in the middle. Whatever may be easiest or most comfortable to you, the truth remains we need each other. And we need to get real about our need for others. And then secondly, we need to get real about our hearts. Let's go back to the scripture and look at verses 37 and 38. It says, "He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.'" This is God in the flesh, and he is saying he is barely hanging on. He's feeling so much he even thinks he might die. Jesus is real about what's going on in his heart. He's not concerned about what his friends are going to think of him. He's not afraid of looking weak in front of them, even though he's their leader. He's not worried about his pain and his weakness affecting their faith. He doesn't downplay his emotions, pretending like they're less than what they really are. No, he's real. How do you naturally respond when you're feeling a lot? Or even just a little bit? Is it like Jesus who shares what's really going on with those around him? I know when I'm in public and I'm feeling a lot or I start to get emotional, I want to go be alone. I want to work through it by myself, cry on my own, or same thing if I'm feeling angry or frustrated. And I actually encountered that this week at ICMC. On Thursday, we had a minister session, and I was really impacted by one of the lessons. I was feeling super emotional, and I literally thought, when I get back to my hotel room, I'm going to really reflect on this and allow myself to embrace the emotions. And so I held it in, and I took a trip to the bathroom, and I ran into somebody I knew there. Not someone I was close to, but someone I knew. And they're like, oh, how are you? And I started to say, oh, I'm good. Well, actually, and so I stopped myself, and I got real. And I shared with her, well, actually, this lesson really affected me. And I don't even know if she asked me more questions, but I shared more things about what I was feeling. I ended up crying with her in the middle of the bathroom. She didn't cry, I cried. But, and God, somewhat intervened in that moment, gave me a chance to lean in. But left to myself, I want to deal with things on my own. Or I want to convince myself, if I think it's unspiritual feelings, I want to convince myself to feel differently, to be more spiritually minded about the situation and ignore the things, the hurts, the anger, the frustration that I'm really feeling. And what I'm doing is I'm avoiding vulnerability. And maybe you're opposite of me and you're like, no way. I tell people what I feel when I'm feeling it. But guess what? You're actually avoiding vulnerability too, because you're not taking the time to reflect on what you're really feeling and then sharing it. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but first I want to talk about why we avoid getting real. Why do we avoid vulnerability? And then I'll finish with the how-tos. So I think there are a number of reasons why, and I think the biggest reason why is fear. We are afraid to let people in. Maybe it's because we don't want to get hurt. Maybe it's because we feel like we're giving up a little bit of control. Maybe we're afraid of saying something that will be used against us, fearful of being judged, of being looked at differently, not being understood, of rejection or looking weird. Yeah. After I walked away from that conversation in the bathroom, you know what some of the thoughts that Satan threw at me were? Oh man, she probably thought I was crazy. What's wrong with this girl? Or, I hope she didn't feel burdened by me sharing all my feelings with her. And then I even thought, what's she going to go tell her husband? I had those thoughts. I'm wrestling with them. And then I remembered I was teaching this lesson. And I was like, wait, no, that was good. I did good. That was right. That's the right thing to do. And it shut down Satan's lies. And I'm sure we all have somewhat similar stories. These fears of rejection, of getting hurt, it's normal. And we all struggle with them to some degree. Yeah. But in the face of fears, we have to look to Jesus and see how he responded. Yeah. Jesus had every reason not to pull his friends in at this point. There was no way his friends were going to understand what he was going through. In fact, he had tried communicating with them just moments before, and they rejected him. They didn't believe what he had to say. No, we would never do that, Jesus. And then what I think is most profound, he knew that the friends present were going to fall asleep on him, that another one of his friends was already on his way to turn him into the authorities, and that eventually all of them were going to desert him. How much easier would it have been for Jesus emotionally if he didn't let them close? If he just saw them as his followers but not his friends? Jesus had so many reasons not to be real, and yet he didn't use any of them as an excuse to hold back his heart. He pushed through, continued to give, even when it hurt. Sisters, when we give our hearts, we will get hurt. Yeah. People will say hurtful things to us, intentionally or unintentionally. They might share with somebody else something we didn't want them to. We're going to be lied to, misunderstood, maybe even judged. And you can look at these things as a reason not to give your heart, but that is not the way of Jesus. If we want to be more like Jesus, we have to be real with others about our hearts and let people close. And as a side note to that, the great thing is when those hard relational things happen, we have a God who knows exactly how we feel, who can relate to us in every way because he's been there. And those heartbreaks even bring us closer to God. So we have to fight Satan's scheme to cause us to act out of fear. And then another reason I think we have a hard time being real is maybe we just don't know how to. We didn't grow up around people who talked about their feelings, right? Yeah. Or we've seen it as weakness, so we avoid it, or we just don't know how to engage. So let's talk about that a little bit. What does it look like to get real about your heart? How do we do it?
Come on, Megan.
So first, being real requires intentionality. Okay. We must take time to engage what's going on in our hearts, from personal reflection, prayer, talking about it with others. Because we don't always know what we feel right away. Like we'll know we feel off, or maybe we get angry, but we don't know why. Normally there's something deeper going on. When I was in college, I had new roommates. A couple of them I had just met, and one of them and I had a lot of conflict. And what it came down to was we brought out each other's insecurities. We were very different from one another, caused a lot of friction. And when I look back, I see one of the biggest things I did wrong was I wasn't real about my heart. And I wish I would have taken the time to figure out what was really going on and communicating those things instead of pushing it down, discipling myself to have a better attitude, and being spiritual. I was trying to be spiritual instead of trying to be real, and I failed on both parts. Today, if you have anger or bitterness towards someone or towards a group of people or towards a situation, if anything comes to mind when I say that, I want to encourage you to look a little bit more deeply about where it's coming from. Spend that energy that you spend on being angry, spend that on engaging your hearts. Ask yourself, okay, no, what am I really feeling right now? Is this coming from a place of insecurity? Because we need to start talking about the vulnerable things. Let's get past addressing our anger, and let's start addressing the sadness, the feelings of jealousy, disappointment, loneliness, feeling stupid or embarrassed or unwanted or uncool. Let's stop looking at and blaming others and their situations, and let's start recognizing the deeper things in our hearts. And then let's also help each other with this. If we want deep and vulnerable relationships, we have to intentionally draw one another out. So the next time someone comes to you and shares with you something personal, instead of being like quick to react, oh my gosh, they did what? Right? Because we could do that. Or quick to give you advice, try asking, well, how did that make you feel? How did you feel when that person said that to you? How are you feeling right now? Hebrews 4:12, it says the word judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. We need to care about our hearts and other people's hearts more than the behavior. Because God's looking at what's going on in the inside. We have to make the decision to do a better job engaging what's really going on and helping others do the same. And then lastly, getting real with your heart means showing up and letting yourself be known. It's not spiritualizing situations. It's not framing things in a way to give off a certain impression. It's not caring about what others think of you. It's letting go of who you think you're supposed to be. Okay? Letting go of who you think you're supposed to be and being real about who you really are and what you really feel, ugly included. I know we don't want to look bad or unspiritual, but we have to get over that. You've heard of the phrase, put your best foot forward. I'm telling you today as disciples, we have to put our worst foot forward. We need to start with the ugly. So can I get real with you guys for a second?
Come on, Megan.
So my past 2 years of full-time ministry have been really hard. From dealing with different sins in the ministry to a lot of women studying the Bible and very few making the decision to get baptized. Our women's ministry has been shrinking rather than growing. And it's been really hard for me. I don't remember in my life ever feeling so much like a failure, so incompetent and inadequate. I've never wrestled so much with believing that God is with me and for me and accepts me, weakness and all. I have felt exhausted, giving my heart, not seeing what I want from it, being lied to. And then to be honest, even as I was preparing this lesson, I felt hesitant sharing these things. Because then I thought, well, what if I lose credibility? What if these women are like, why do they choose her to speak? Her ministry's not doing well. Insecurity, right? I care what people think, and it keeps me from wanting to be vulnerable. But I shared some of these thoughts at a women's midweek back home a couple weeks ago, and you know what happened afterwards? Woman after woman came up to me and shared the ways that they related with me, the things that they connected with, that they were going through. Some of them built me up and encouraged me. Honestly, I walked away and I told my husband, I love that. So many people encouraged me. I need to do this more. I need it. Even one invited me over to her house to make me food and talk more about it. Why the outpour of love after? Because getting real brings closeness and depth. Why the fear? Because Satan doesn't want us to experience that closeness and depth. So whatever's going on in your heart, whatever things you're feeling, whatever things you're struggling with, get real. Get real with yourself about your need for others, and get real with others about your heart.
So, man, Megan just did an incredible job teaching us about, I think these two things are so perfect, how to get real and admit that we need each other, but then also to share with people our whole heart instead of just parts of it. I'm like sitting here looking at her with her bare feet going like, man, I need to do that because nobody likes to wear shoes at ICMC. It's a little bit. And we're about to get messy anyways. So let's go ahead and dig into the second half of this lesson about how to get messy in our relationships. So I'd like to share with you 3 different ideas about this, 3 different aspects. And the first one is that we have to get messy and choose. So turn over to Matthew 26 if you're not already there. And I'm going to tell you guys the verses that I'm going to read, but I want you to just write them down and then just listen, because I want you to really pick up on the story that's happening here. We're actually going to rewind just a little bit from where Megan started out. So I'm going to read to you verses 20 through 22 of chapter 26, and then 31 through 35, and 36 through 38. So it says, when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. And they were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, surely not I, Lord. And then Jesus told them, this very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered. Before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. You know, we have to choose to risk it and let people in, being completely raw with them, even if it doesn't feel good. I don't know about you guys, but have you ever wondered why we say this phrase, being raw? or like gut level honest. Well, I have wondered about that. Why on earth do we say you got to be raw with somebody? Like, that's like what you used to talk about meat. So why do we say that about relationships? But when I really learned what this really means is when I was learning how to prepare Thanksgiving turkey for the very first time, right? Okay, so we have this massive dead animal in the sink. I'm telling you, like, you think that was 8 pounds or something? Like, no, this thing was like huge, okay? And my mom coaches me through like how to stick my hand up this animal, like pull out the like neck, and then they call them like giblets or something, some like nasty type of organ that some people like to eat for the flavor, okay? And as soon as I did it, I like writhed in disgust. Like my body was like, this is disgusting, I can't handle it. I ran away and I screamed and I was like, Mom, never ever am I doing that again. I don't care. If that's what it takes to be a good housewife, I can't do it. And, you know, raw is better than pre-cooked. That's why we buy it. It's supposed to be the best product. It's fresher, tastes better when you cook it, right? And it's healthier for you. But raw can be disgusting. And if you don't believe me, trust me. You don't want to do that, okay? So we know Jesus deliberately chose these 12 particular guys to be his people to go on this mission for his dad. He invited the apostles into his life, even the really hard parts, like Megan talked about. Jesus was not afraid of the mess that comes with being raw. And these were really loyal guys. Even when you read this passage, Jesus mentioned that one of them is going to betray him, and they're all like, it's not me, right, Jesus? Like, it couldn't be me. And then Jesus lets Peter in on the fact that Peter's going to let him down big time. And Peter's like, no way! I die before I deny that I'm with you. You're my best friend. And all the other guys said the same thing. They really, truly loved Jesus, but we know that they were flawed and they were messed up. The point here is that even though they were imperfect people, Jesus still chose to let them in anyway. Now, I'm telling you, very rarely does it feel right or good to be completely raw with someone. So don't count on that. It's really messy. But if we trust Jesus, we have to choose to trust his people too. There's a reason we think of James 5:16 when we talk about revealing ourselves to people. It says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Because it's true. Vulnerability brings healing and connection, no matter whether you're right or wrong. The most important thing is that what comes out of you is authentic. And clearly Jesus knew this, right? He didn't hide his anguish or struggle from his friends. In fact, he really did just the opposite. He purposefully invited them into it. Now, I'm learning that it's absolutely best to be honest about my thoughts and feelings and mistakes and victories too with people, even if my worst fears and insecurities about what they might think or other consequences that might come actually come true because of it. Because then God and I will be connected. I can stand before him and be like, we're good, and I'm going to get to go to heaven. I've had to be raw recently. This has been my first year doing full-time ministry, and man, so many times I've had to really get raw with my trainer, Christina, about my insecurities of not doing enough things well compared to how many mistakes I make. And I've been so worried about what she might think about my struggle with pride. Because I've wanted the approval of someone other than God. But because I chose to be real, she's actually gotten many times to help me understand God's perspective, and even see her perspective about my life. So being honest has been really messy, but it's been really refreshing at the same time. So how about you? Do you choose to share the deepest, darkest parts of your life, or are you keeping secrets? Do you divulge or deceive? Your friends aren't really your friends unless they know the real you. If they don't, they're probably in a pretend relationship with you. Can people close to you tell when something's up? That's a good gauge. If not, you're probably not very transparent in your lifestyle. You know, Jesus received intimacy from his best friends in his very hardest moments because he wasn't afraid of getting messy. And then all his buds got to share in the victory later on when he raised from the dead, even though they weren't perfect. It didn't matter. we can have this same intimacy and victory in our relationships too. Now, aside from choosing to be raw, it's also vital for us to get messy and confront. So that's the second idea we're going to talk about here. Now, remember verses 31 through 35, but we're going to read right now 47 through 54. It says, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Jesus replied, friend, do what you came for. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached out for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Put your sword back in its place, Jesus said to him. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call him my father? And he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? It is crucial for us to be willing to get our hands dirty and confront problems, disagreements, hurts, tragedies, sin, and even misunderstandings in our relationships. We need to be conflict resolvers. I mean, can you believe how Jesus even handled each of these situations? It baffles me. I usually don't think of this passage this way, actually, but there was quite a bit of confrontation happening. And when I say confront, I don't mean in anger or violently or like with a hostile approach. One of the definitions of that word actually is simply to face up to a problem or situation. So that's what we're talking about here. It is amazing to me how Jesus gently explained to Peter that Peter would stab him in the back very soon. Or how Jesus didn't ignore the elephant in the room when Judas came to betray him, but rather acknowledged the mistake very intentionally by saying, friend, do what you came for. And even with whichever disciple it was that got a bit heated and cuts off somebody's ear in the live moment that's happening there, a lot of people think it was Peter. That makes a lot of sense considering how Peter acts. Jesus didn't waste an opportunity to confront the disciple in the moment and explain his different way of thinking to them. So how do you respond when conflict arises? Do you get faithful or frustrated? Heated or helpful? Do you get aggressive and avoiding or compassionate and courageous? Okay, so now that I live in Colorado, I moved from the Midwest, from Cincinnati, Ohio to Denver, and now I get to have all kind of adventures that I never had in my life before, which is really fun. But recently, I went bouldering for the first time. Have any of you ever done that?
No.
Yes. She went with me, yeah. So bouldering is like rock climbing, except like approximately 1,000,000 times scarier because there's no harness thing. You don't clip into a rope. There's no backup for you. You just hanging off of a rock. And yeah, yikes. I'm whoa. So when you're climbing, you have to make sure that your shoes are always dry and clean and there's no moisture on your hands because if there is, then you slip and fall and it hurts really bad. I saw someone do it while I was there. And in fact, because of that, people carry around chalk for their hands and the bottom of their shoes so that they'll have good grip and not slip. You would never want to start bouldering if there was a huge puddle at the bottom or something. You'd just be doomed from the beginning. But our relationships with one another are kind of like the rock wall or the mountain. And unresolved conflict is kind of like that moisture on our hands and feet. Or even it could be as massive as a puddle at the bottom of the rock. Because if we don't continuously resolve hard situations, just like applying the chalk, it causes you to slip as you're trying to climb the mountain. 1 Corinthians 13 is a great attitude for us to adopt as we consider how to be like Jesus, even in approaching hard situations. Conflict is messy, but consider what it says in verses 4 through 7. It says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. All right. We all got that? Okay. and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. It's the NLT version. We have to remember, to God, confrontation is about love. Now, let's talk quickly about a few practicals for resolving conflict. The first one is address it quickly. Whatever the conflict is, somebody else's sin, your sin, a disagreement, a miscommunication, we have to talk about it and not avoid it. Make sure you're prepared to be spiritual, for sure, but don't put it off. There's a difference between those two things. Jesus didn't wait long to resolve conflict. The second one is be vulnerable. It goes a long way to share with someone how a situation or a sin or whatever it is made you feel or how it came across to you. But it's not effective to accuse people or go at them without any conversation. We need to admit where we've been wrong when we're confronting people and apologize, but then still be honest with the person. The scripture says love is not rude or irritable, nor does it demand its own way. So remember, vulnerability is what brings healing and connection. The third practical is we have to believe the best. Love keeps no record of wrongs, never gives up, never loses faith, and is always hopeful. That's convicting. So don't make assumptions. Instead, ask questions. You could say, how were you thinking and feeling when you made that particular comment? You can say, can you help me understand why you made this certain decision? You can even just say, can you just tell me more about how you perceive that situation? And the last practical is going to be, we have to speak the truth in love. You know, sin affects friendships, even severely sometimes. To me, it's like a grenade. Even if one person holds on to it in secret or alone or by themselves, everyone around them gets shrapnel when it goes off. We have to talk to each other about the hard stuff, especially sin. But 1 Peter 4:8 tells us to, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. No matter how confrontation goes, let your love win out at the end of the day. Let's aim to handle conflict the way Jesus did with his guys. Being willing to get messy and confront the hard stuff, because it's then that we're going to get to the kind of depth and intimacy in our relationships that God intended for us all along, the whole time. So now we're going to come to a close by talking about our need to get messy and care. So write down Matthew 26, verses 54 through 56. And then I'm just going to read 27, verses 50 through 51. So listen to the end of the story here. Jesus starts and he says, but how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, am I leading a rebellion? That you've come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me, but this has all taken place, that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then the disciples deserted him and fled. And after this, we know that Jesus goes to trial, gets beaten, ridiculed, and crucified. And then we see in chapter 27, verse 50, and when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. Jesus set the ultimate example. We need to care more about people than about ourselves or preserving our relationship with them. In chapter 26, verses 54 and 56, we know this quote that when Jesus says, all this has taken place that the scriptures will be fulfilled, he's talking about the betrayals and getting arrested. But he also knows, like Megan referred to, that at this point, the whole prophecy is going to be fulfilled very soon. He's going to be beaten beyond recognition, ridiculed by losers, accused of falsely claiming to be the king of the Jews, and ultimately nailed to a cross, brutally losing his life. But for who? Me. And you. A few weeks ago, I was having time with a couple of the girls in my ministry. My friend Tessia, we're sitting in like a Starbucks on campus, pulls out this fat container of seaweed, like for a snack. Okay, seriously, ew. Like, I just can't, okay? I could be a hippie sometimes, but I can't go for seaweed. That's like way too far over the line for me. But of course she proceeds to like make our two other friends eat a piece of it for fun, like her fun, I guess, I don't know. And then she keeps on shoving a piece of it towards me, and I was quite vocal about the fact that I do not like seaweed. I hate the taste of it. It literally makes me want to throw up, guys. I'm not kidding. Like, it's disgusting. But she just kept laughing at me, and she's like, Julia, you need to care more about me and what's best for me than what you want. And I want you to eat the seaweed. And I was like, for real, you gotta be kidding me. You're good, like, making this like that? Okay. And so, whatever, I eat it. And I'm, like, trying not to gag the whole time. But I ate it. And it was every bit as disgusting as I thought it was. This may be a silly example, but in our friendships, we really do need to care so much more about the person. Like, what's best for them, where they stand with God, than what we do about what we want or preserving the state of our friendship. That's messed up. Sometimes we need to put our own selves, or even the friendship, on the line for the sake of the friend. You know, John 15:12-13 is one of my very favorite scriptures. It has been for a while. Probably like in my top 100 favorite scriptures. It says, "My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." I mean, what a crazy, radical thing to say. People don't do that. What I like the most is that it's Jesus. It's words straight from his mouth. And personally, I don't think he was exaggerating, because he proceeded to live it out quite vividly after he taught it to his people. Do you guys remember in the story when Peter struck off the servant's ear? And Jesus is like, do you think I can't call him my dad? And he's going to like bring 2,000 angels down here to rescue me? He definitely didn't have to lay down his life for me or for you. And you know, something that bothers me is we don't really like to use the example of Jesus dying on the cross to call us higher in our selflessness. How much we care. We even joke that it's like the trump card scripture. Oh, you would go there. She went there. That's what we say. But is this not the very man who tells us we should lay down our lives for our friends? The same man we claim to imitate in our faith. You know, several years ago, my best friend at one point got into some really, really deep sin that she kept in the dark and even lied to me about for several months. And when I eventually found out, I was super hurt. I was hurt that my friend had chosen Satan over God, but I was also hurt that she had deceived me for so long, because we were really close. But then I got sentimental. And I was convinced someone else should be the one to talk to her about all of it, because I didn't want to wreck our friendship. I wanted to save our relationship more than I cared about saving her soul. Soon after this, I sat down with two very respected women in my life who proceeded to say to me, quite frankly, how dare you not run to pull your friend out of the fire? She's walking in the flames, and that is Satan's playground. They told me that I was the very one that needed to speak honestly and plead with her about this stuff. And guys, I will never think about my relationships the same way again. Really caring about people is really messy. But we have to be like Jesus and care more about people than we do about ourselves or even our relationships with them. Do you care more about yourself or people? When it comes to calling out sin, do you preserve your friendship or protect their friendship with God? When people have victories, do you celebrate or criticize? God has set us up for amazing success and victory in our relationship with him and in our relationships with all the women in our lives, if we'll just imitate the bold, radical example Jesus set. The coolest thing about our friendships, I think, is that not only are we called to lay down our lives by that scripture, but so are all of you guys. Like, I'm supposed to do it, and you're supposed to do it too. There is going to be incredible, fulfilling, even life-changing relationships for us if we choose to do it God's way. I don't know about you, but I want that. So let's get real and get messy.
Well, thank you guys for coming. I know it's getting a little stuffy in here, right? We have about 15 minutes left. We want to maybe take the next 5 to 10 minutes and have a little bit of a Q&A. If anyone has a question, even about a specific situation or anything, wanted to give you a chance to ask or share. So, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing. I think it's cool. We've talked a lot about vulnerability in our ministry and have read Brene Brown.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Very greatly all together. It's very, very, it's an awesome thing. But something I wanted to ask you was, because not everybody, I don't think anybody enjoys being vulnerable.
Yeah.
That exists. But because you were saying too, like, some people have the strength of sharing and some people don't. What if I'm sharing with someone who does not have the strength and it's hard for them to accept, like, what I'm sharing? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on the person listening to what the other person's sharing, how they can respond, what can they do, what should their job
That's great.
also.
That's great. Thanks. Sarah is my best friend from 14 years old. Yeah, I think even with this idea of getting real, like, we even have to get real about the things that are too much for us and the idea of caring. Like, if someone's expressing things and not the type of person that, like, can handle it, we have to be real. Like, hey, like, I'm really glad you're sharing this with me. Like, really grateful for that. This is a little much for me. And can we have a little space, or can you maybe readjust in the things like being real about what's too much? Or if we're on the other side and we know somebody is maybe not the spill your guts type, I think even asking them, like, hey, is this too much for you? Can I share with, I love going in the conversations and asking people, can I share with you some things that I see? Or can I share with you some things that I'm feeling? And give them the chance to say no, or at least prepare them if they want to. Okay, like, let me brace myself for this. So I would say just, get real if things are too much, and ask people what is appropriate or how much they can handle.
Yeah.
Get thoughts.
Yeah, maybe like really small practical thing, I think, is like, even as we're being the ones learning to respond to that type of vulnerability, if you can't handle it or you don't know what to say, like, it's a great thing to just get in the habit of like, oh my gosh, Megan is so good at that. You have to talk to her about these things, and I'm going to ask you about it on Sunday.
That's good, yeah.
Get them to talk to more people. More help is always better than less.
That's good.
What if someone's trump card is that they're never ready to talk? And every time you try to confront something, they're always like, I'm not ready to talk about it. And it's almost like a wall.
Yeah. Do you want to respond?
I can respond quickly. I mean, just one thought. Jesus just didn't do that. And so I think you can even use this passage in Matthew 26 of like, look, he actually on purpose brought these people into what he was feeling and thinking about. And if you're not ready to talk about it because you don't know, that's also like we're choosing to be naive to our own lives, which is totally an example of our own pride. I majorly struggle with that very thing. Like, I don't want to feel it, so I just don't want to go there at all. But I think we need to start challenging each other as sister. That like, even avoiding it in your own mind is part of your arrogance. Like, you cannot choose to hide things from God or from his people.
Yeah, and I would say too, like, even addressing that, like, okay, so what are you going to do to get there? You know, like, okay, you keep feeling like I'm not ready. What steps are you taking to get ready? And that's what you're starting with. Not whatever that person needs to talk about, but you need to mold their heart to be open and vulnerable.
How do you get a girl who's studying the Bible to get open? I'm studying the Bible with this girl, and she just does not want to get open. I hang out with her once a week.
Yeah.
I like tell her about my life, and I get really vulnerable with her, but she just won't get open with me or any of the girls in her Bible studies. How do you help a girl who's studying the Bible who hasn't made the decision to make Jesus Lord of their life?
That's a good question. I don't know if we could ever get anybody to get open, you know, and there's going to be people who don't want to, and it's faithful perseverance, patience, and prayer, you know, like continue doing what you're doing. Pray, pull her into your prayer times. Prayer, I think, is one of the most vulnerable things we can do. And if we can pull other people into that, it's going to bring out more vulnerability. And so I don't think there's anything additional you can do except keep being vulnerable yourself and keep praying for her. You know, show her scriptures. Yeah.
So I've had this friend for 12 years. She's not a disciple. And I'm pretty real, but I'm not necessarily vulnerable. She's very shy. She's very introverted. She does not and won't really express, and she claims never to have interest. But I just keep loving her. How real and vulnerable, like, how real do I tell her that, like, her life is in danger with the way she's going? Like, because, like, our friendship has been on the line before because she feels like I kept pushing or I wasn't listening to her. But at the same time, it was just miscommunication, and, like, we worked it out. But it's been 12 years, and, like, she's not anywhere interested than she was in the beginning. Like, how do I show her and be vulnerable and roll with her to the point to where she sees the softening of my heart and like how much danger she's actually in? Because I'm afraid to put our friendship on the line, because I'm afraid if like I lose her, then I lose the chance to bring her out.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys heard the question in the back, but she was saying she's had a friend for 12 years and she's not a disciple. She's trying to reach out to her, real and vulnerable with her, but it's caused friction in the relationship at times. And so how do you continue to be vulnerable and real and not push her away and lose the opportunity to save her soul? Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I have a quick thought about that. There's a conversation that I call like appeal to the friendship with people that are my friends who are disciples. At a certain point, I'll like have a talk where I'm like, I care so much about you. Like, I just love you so much. Like, you've become one of my best friends. And I know that we don't agree on everything, but I gotta be honest with you. Like, when I read the Bible, I'm just, like, really afraid of what's gonna happen to you. Like, I want you to be with me at the end of my life. And I feel unsure of what happens. And I just wish I could share all of this with you. And then there's been times that even in tears I've talked to people that way. And I think even seeing your emotion about their life, sometimes that snaps people into like, oh my gosh, this actually matters. So I think that's worth a shot. And I even think that's the kind of conversation that you can have periodically throughout a long-term friendship. You don't talk about it all the time, but you kind of come back to it once in a while, because they do need to see how we feel about the state of our lives, just how Jesus calls us to like be moved in compassion for the lost on a big scale.
Yeah,
She's been around, she's been to church camp, she was supposed to come to ICMC, but she didn't make it. So I've like expressed how much I care for her, and she knows some of the girls in my ministry because she's come out a few times. But she's just like, well, I believe in praying Jesus into my heart, and I believe I'm safe, and I just don't agree with you. And so I don't know how to like just be like, I don't want to say well you're wrong, and so but I want to show like she's just too afraid to give it a chance.
Yeah, we can definitely talk more about that.
Can we take one more question? Yes.
How vulnerable could you be with a brother? Like, how far is too vulnerable?
That's a great question. Is there a class on that? A really great question. I would like to see if there's a class on it, because I think that requires It's next?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. So
Healthy relationships with them.
yes. I would always say like overall, your deepest relationship should always be with women. And you should always be getting vulnerable with women first, way before men. And then know yourself and your tendencies. You know, some of us, it's not an issue. Some of us, it's easier to talk to guys. If that's your case, be extra intentional about not doing it. You know, because where your heart can lead through that. And get advice. You know, like when I was dating and I wanted to share something with my boyfriend, wasn't sure, I would ask, hey, is it appropriate for me to share with him about this emotional conversation I had with my dad? Or about what I'm feeling here, or these insecurities. Like, do you think that's appropriate? And so that would be my brief version of how to go to the class. All right, thank you guys so much for coming.